All right, we are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Todd Matthews is with us. I guess you could say he's one of the leading voices in the crime community with regard to unidentified and missing persons cases. And been involved in this a lot, involved with various organizations. Now he primarily speaks and consults on these cases, and there are so many of them. We've got some folks that waited through the break. Todd, let's take Diane. What do you say? Okay. Diane, good morning, Diane. What's on your mind?
Good morning. I'd just like to make a quick statement real quick if you guys have enough time.
Yeah.
A couple of years back, one of my neighbors, someone that he used to date years ago, used to still stop by and stop by his home, and whenever I would see her, I would raise my hand up and she would throw her hand up and, never really thought anything about it. So one day I took a friend down to the courthouse, to the misdemeanor court thing, and, you couldn't go in, so I was sitting out there on the bench, and I looked over, and Stephanie was sitting on the bench down from me.
Yeah.
And so I walked over, and I sat down beside her. I said, Stephanie, what are you doing up here? She said, well, I'm up here with my boyfriend. And I said, oh, okay, well, I hope everything goes okay. But she was talking real slow for some reason. And so I didn't think anything of it. So about a month later, I saw my neighbor, and he said, that Stephanie's missing. I said, she is.
Huh.
And he said, yeah, we got posters up all over East Nashville, little flyers up, because I hadn't nobody heard from in about, a couple of months. And that was unlike her not to contact her daughter and her mother. And anyway, a few months passed by and they found her body in Kentucky. And I felt so bad because I wished I had asked who she was with.
Yeah, and you don't know why she was there, the connection, and as far as you know, no one's ever been arrested for what happened to her?
Not that I know of.
And do you believe she was murdered? They think she was murdered?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, she was murdered, but they found her up in Kentucky. And I've just always felt bad because, sometimes, especially when you see, she was talking kind of slower than normal.
Okay, so you wonder. See, hear a case like this, and she had actually contact with this person after the fact, and then she turns up dead, and still, as far as we know, no one arrested up in Kentucky. What about cases like that?
Well, the hindsight's 20/20 on those.
Yeah.
And there's so many times you see something, it's like, if I'd asked that question at that time.
But you're not
and I hear
thinking,
people tell me
she's
that.
asking strange, she's going to turn up dead somewhere.
Yeah, you don't think about those things, but I've had a lot of stories very similar to that where people have mentioned, like, if only I had asked where they were going. If only I asked who they were meeting.
Right.
So you hear a lot of that.
Let's take a call from Ann next. Ann, good morning. Hi, Ann.
Good morning. Before there was a Tabitha Tudors, there was a little boy, Corey, and the criteria for both of those cases with Amber Alerts was very different than the criteria for an Amber Alert now. What has changed with the Amber Alert system for the criteria to put one out? My little group and I were talking about this in February when the Amber Alert for Evelyn was put out. It used to be very, very specific, and when Tabitha went missing, it was the time lapse was very different in being put up and getting the word out than what goes now.
Okay, I see where she's kind of going. People have frustrations sometimes, and I think the TBI does a good job of explaining it. When they say someone's missing, why can't you just issue the Amber Alert right now, okay? But there is criteria, and among other things, the criteria there has to be some indication of foul play or some concern that there is a safety issue, right?
And that makes sense because you could actually further endanger somebody, a child, if you're too aggressive at getting information out there. So I think the TBI do a great job.
Well, yeah, do you think it should be modified? I mean, some people say, well, an Amber Alert should be extended for people of older age, like Holly Bobo was a high-profile case, and that wasn't included. Or, how long do you wait, or why wait if someone's missing? And look, I have a problem with this. We hear a lot of times from concerned parents, and I understand it, when their teenage daughter or son disappears for a few days. And they're calling everyone and freaking out. Of course, they always say, it's not like my son.
Yeah.
But that's it. okay? And they're like, well, why not an Amber Alert for that? And there's no indication of foul play. 99.9% of the time, those kids show up at a friend's house or someplace else, no problem at all. And I'm like, that's why we don't send out an Amber Alert every time some panicky parent's upset because their kid disappeared. Because 99% of the time, there's not foul play involved.
Usually, you're right.
I mean, I'm not going to post a story for someone who calls me and says, my kid disappeared last night. Once I get details, I say, reported it to police. Do you think there's any foul play? Whatever, blah, blah, blah. No, but it's just not like him to disappear. Like, sorry, I'm not going to report it.
The media can't become a location service.
Exactly, but sometimes they expect us to do that.
Yeah.
We will do it if there's indication of foul play, if the police say there's a need, if there's an endangered child alert, certainly if there's an Amber Alert. But everyone's like, throw that, because I think if you start throwing that stuff out willy-nilly, people stop paying attention.
They do, and I think the news media is just as important as every forensic service. That dental DNA fingerprints, I think the news media, when responsibly handled, and that's what you guys are talking about. Like, you don't want to just put out something without vetting it, and that's absolutely the perfect thing to do. And it might seem like it takes too long.
Right.
But if you're a mom or a dad of a missing child of any age, there is no time that's.
And I understand why they're freaking out. But I'm sorry, we're not going to bend to that just because your kid disappears. And they always swear, no, it's not like it. And then he turns up at Billy's house down the road playing video games.
But I get where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I would beg you too. You know, if I felt like I was in that spot and I thought my child was in danger, I would understand. So I try to take that with understanding and education.
Right.
Like, don't expect this to happen immediately. That's why it's important to do things like this to give people a better understanding of what to expect.
Yeah, and I heard where Ann's going from that. Now, in terms of how quickly you go about it, let's talk about the Evelyn Boswell case a bit. What's curious about this is that the report is that she was last seen back in December, but her mother never reported her missing. The Amber Alert only going out a couple of weeks ago. When you take from that, that's 2 months, basically, where, boy, that gives a head start to whoever's involved, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and if you don't know, you're not working the case, you don't want to throw a lot of speculation into it. And that's I've had questions from the media, and it's like, if I gave you an answer, I would be guessing. I would only be guessing or speculating it's something that I'm not involved in. And that can be really dangerous because there's already so many rumors out there. When people fill in the gaps because there's avoiding data, it got an officer killed in Tennessee. I mean, in Overton County, there was an officer that, there was a report that body had been put into a sinkhole. The Jonathan Thrasher case from more than 15 years ago. The officer slipped and fell to his death in that, and he was the first officer killed in the line of duty in Overton County. And I feel like it wasn't just an accident. He was looking for a missing person and accidentally fell to his death, but that was caused by something. That was caused because he went there to follow up on a tip. It wasn't a true tip.
There was nothing, but still, they're going to follow up on tips.
Yeah.
Right? You have to do that anyway, though. He's going to look, and maybe it's unfortunate he slipped and fell, right? Was that what it was?
It was slippery around it was a vertical sinkhole. It's basically a cave more than 100 feet deep. And they got to look at the bottom of that cave, and there was nobody there but his. And that's just, even law enforcement can be put in danger with things like this.
So with the Boswell case, then, the fact that they found the child's remains 2 months after she was last seen alive, the question now is what? What's important for the medical examiner and for investigators to learn? A
positive identification, first of all, especially if they think the cause of death could be homicide, which I don't know that to be true. But they don't just do a visual identification. If it's something that could be something that's going to be in court, or a lot of accusations that are going to go back and forth, they're going to make sure that person is positively identified as that individual.
And would you imagine they would do that by DNA?
Yes, I would think DNA.
I'm sure they have a DNA sample from the family, and they're able to compare it.
That's the quickest way, a direct comparison. I don't know if the little girl had dental records. I doubt she's been fingerprinted, so it would be DNA.
And as far as seeking cause of death, why is that important? Now, we don't know if it's a homicide. We don't know yet if she was shot, if she died of a natural cause, whatever the case.
Yes, when and how she died.
Why is that important to know?
How long has she been dead? They can find that out because you can be skeletal remains in a very short period of time. It's usually a lot shorter than people realize before you become unrecognizable. Clothing, how would you know for sure? That might give you a tentative ID, like we know that sweater belongs to that person. But a positive ID is done with forensic services, so there's no doubt about that. But, how long that person's been dead, did they die there, or were they taken there? Was it a homicide? Was it an accident? Was it to cover an accident? There's so many things that you just have to leave to law enforcement. You just and they might know a lot more than they're able to tell you at the time. They can't just, especially for the news media does it to inform the public to make a safer community. But a lot of it is on these message boards. A lot of it's their entertainment. They're sharing it because it's something that they really, really like. They like to read these things, these true crimes, and it's like we can't endanger a case because we like to talk about these things.
Right. Now, you would imagine, I'm sure that they have things they have not shared with the media, and I totally understand that. I mean, would you imagine the law enforcement at this point has their suspicions? The question is whether the evidence will match up?
I'm sure they have a whole lot more information that they've shared, and rightfully so. But I always encourage law enforcement, when they've not reached out to media, give it a try. There's, you can get some really good answers if you go to the media. Just coordinate,
If criminal charges are going to come, and I know that's a big if, so I don't want you to over-speculate, but would that come fairly soon after they get some of the answers to this case? Let's say the homicide, it comes back that the cause of death was homicide, and they've positively identified the child.
Well, if they have a suspect, they might have a suspect already in mind. I'm sure they have a scenario in mind, so how quickly that wraps up. But look at how long the Holly Bobo case has been going. And a lot of that, is getting your ducks in a row when the case has been processed.
And you know this because you've played such an important role in discovering remains and then identifying remains. How important is it to actually find physical evidence, be it a body or blood evidence? Because we have the Evelyn Boswell case now, we know her remains have been found. Holly Bobo, they found parts of her body, including a skull. Joe Clyde Daniels, the little 5-year-old boy who disappeared a couple years ago in Dixon County, there's not been a trace of him. That makes it more difficult prosecution, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It does happen. There's been no body IDs before. There's cases that do happen with a lot of evidence, but
circumstantial evidence. So you can prosecute and win with circumstantial.
It can happen, but finding that body is of the utmost importance, so that you have physical evidence that proves what happened to that person. It's no longer speculation. It's they have an autopsy, an examination, and they can say cause and manner of death. This person's been dead this period of time. Were they brought there, or did they die there? There's so many things that they can find out. And families are often not satisfied with what they hear. And just because you don't like the cause and manner of death doesn't mean it's not true. And I've seen families take a period of time to process, to understand, can I accept this? That this really happened in this way.
Yeah.
And that's a period of time. That's not unusual for a family to say, no, that wouldn't have happened. They would not have done that.
Yeah.
Sometimes these cases, I've seen cases where people have called me to help them understand a process. And, and it's like I've seen a lot of these. And it might take a period of years. The John Thrasher case, there's been a period of years that I've, worked with the family or worked with law enforcement on it. Most recently, there was a billboard put up, a series of billboards, and that kind of brought a little information forward, but not enough.
Yeah.
Still not enough.
You never give up. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, I'd like, if you don't mind, to we can take a few more calls, but talk about some of these cases. Thrasher case, talk a little bit about Tent Girl, and some of these and how it evolved. But like you said, you've got a bunch of stories. He's going to write a book one of these days. We'll take a break. Be back with more with our guest right after this.